Right. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today to our webinar on digitizing the green cities. And of course, lately, all of us can see the importance of this topic and the relevance of it, whether regarding water absorption and floods, or countering this extreme heat in cities that we are facing in Eastern Europe. And yes, in the conditions of our current mostly poor management of all trees and green areas, we have to really learn how to manage trees and green areas better, and how to use modern technologies and tools to really perform better in this area. I'm happy that Nadine is joining today, and I was fascinated with her experience 2 years ago during the Circular Cities School, when I was listening to her amazing projects dealing with trees and green areas in Amsterdam, Boston, all over the world. Later, after I watched her TEDx video, I realized where it comes from and why she's doing that. But before I give the floor to Nadine, I would like to thank Reinout from the Dutch embassy. He is the agricultural counselor and is a big friend of Rethink. The embassy is supporting us already for many times with our webinars, and I would like to give the floor to Reinout for a short welcome word. Reinout, please.
Yes, thank you, Roman. Thank you very much. Also, I want to thank your organization, Rethink, because you're very unique in Ukraine. You do a lot to promote sustainability and circular economy. I think it's very important for Ukraine. It matches also with our ambitions, because we also like to promote from our agricultural office sustainable agricultural practices. We also promote healthy living. So today's forum is an excellent example of how to do that. Thank you very much about this. Just a few words from my side. I'm Reinhard Nuiten. I'm agricultural counselor. I'm in Ukraine already for 2 years, enjoying it a lot. At the same time, of course, the lockdown prevents you to travel too much. But nevertheless, I took that opportunity as much as I could. I visited a lot of cities in Ukraine, and I always enjoyed the cities, because some of the observations I had is that most cities are very comfortable to work, and it's you have space for leisure, beautiful parks, the cities are clean. Everything that you need is in walking distance, and like I said, it's all green with all those parks. So this is very enjoyable. As a person, I am very much on the side of both nature loving and digitalization. So I also watched the TED talk of Nadine, and I really was fascinated by all those terms: the Internet of Nature, smart urban forests, urban green space technologies. It took me a while to grasp the magnitude of our ideas. And I really support this approach, because we live in a digital era, and we should take all those opportunities, because in the end, using these technologies will help to preserve and expand on nature in the city. Just maybe an addition from my side, I don't know if anyone knows about this Gaia hypothesis. It's a theory from the 70s, developed by James Lovelock. This says that the principle proposed that living organisms interact with their organic surroundings on Earth to form a synergistic and self-regulating complex systems that help to maintain and perpetuate the conditions for life of the planet. This is a mouthful, but what it means that we are all interconnected already, according to this theory. But we don't understand it very well. What you see in cities is with the speed of urbanization that a lot of issues are there, and we cannot solve them. Garbage issues, traffic issues. The cities are a human experiment, a social experiment, but we are not. We did not make it Gaia-proof, so to say. So that's my observation. I will stop here. I want to wish everyone a very good webinar. Nadine will tell about the technologies. The only additional comment that I would like to make for now is using technology is good, and like I said, I support it full-heartedly, but it is important to remember that responsibility is always there with the people, with the users. If I look sometimes around when I go up Zamkova Gore nearby in Podil where I live, I see all the trash. Technology will not solve it for you if you intend to pollute the environment. So that is my message. Take your responsibility and use technology. So that's it from my side.
Thank you so much. Indeed, very relevant for Ukraine. Thank you. So Nadina, thank you again. And the floor is yours now. Please start with your slides and your speech. We're looking forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Roman. And thank you so much for the introduction, Reinout. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I'm really excited to take you through some of what I think are some of the most promising new emerging technologies that can help us, the name of this webinar, digitize the green in our cities, and why I think that that's crucial in terms of bringing us into this new era of urban development. But just to take a couple quick steps back, my name is Nadina, and I grew up in a very typical North American suburb that looked very much like the one that you see here on the left. Actually, this photo was taken just a couple miles away from the actual suburb in which I grew up, except mine doesn't have a lovely aerial photo like this one. And in this suburb in southwestern Ontario in Canada, this is the norm, this idea that we have these beautiful forested ecosystems, and the way that we go about urban development there is first we absolutely remove everything, we clear cut everything, and then we put down all these very car-centric cookie cutter houses that are very much based around the individual and the need for individual space, with these cookie cutter houses, these cookie cutter backyards, and this access to our cars and these roads that make it, of course, not necessarily a very safe place to play for children. But also what's interesting is that they're really set out to be a place where you take your car from point A to point B, which actually reduces the amount of cohesion, of the amount of time that you spend talking to your neighbors, etc. This neighborhood actually did a little bit better. They actually put sidewalks in, but on the street that I grew up on, we didn't even have a sidewalk. It was very much based, as I said, around the car. And then my favorite part of this photo, as well as you see on the left, is that they've actually gone in and added seedlings to this area later, added these trees after the fact as a way to make up perhaps for the fact that they've destroyed this ecosystem, but at the same time, they've realized this greenery is exactly what makes this neighborhood so attractive, both socially, ecologically, but for an urban developer, most importantly, economically as well. So I think that we've come to this point where we've become more aware the role that urban nature has to play when it comes to balancing and building these better places for both people and nature to live, which is what ultimately helped me decide to study first ecology and then earth sciences. And then about a year ago, I defended my PhD in ecological engineering. And after I finished my master's, I started working at a sustainability consultancy in Amsterdam called Metabolic. And Metabolic was the co-initiative taker of the summer school that we put on with the University of Amsterdam called Towards a Circular City, which Roman took part in a few years back. And what Metabolic really focuses on is this idea, and that's also how Metabolic got its name, that every system has a metabolism, whether that's a city, a festival, a hotel. Every city has a metabolism, meaning that it has inputs, it has outputs, and in between, things happen to those inputs that determine what happens with them when they leave that system. So this is an example that we did for the city of Rotterdam, where we looked at all the things going into the city of Rotterdam, how they're being used, and what they exit that system of. But of course, what you might notice in this graphic is that Rotterdam itself almost looks like a black box, or a white box in this case, meaning that there's still so much unknown in terms of what happens within that box. And it kind of led me to this broader kind of idea that when we go about developing cities, when we go about pursuing urban development, investors, urban developers, and even citizens to a great degree look at this ecosystem that we build cities on as a blank canvas. But in fact, as we're starting to discover more and more, these ecosystems are not blank canvases. In fact, they are ecosystems. They are fully developed landscape paintings. And then when it comes to actually developing urban areas, we have to be very considerate of what's already there and how can we build in a way that, as Reinhard was saying, is more aligned with Gaia, or more in line with how Mother Nature has intended things. And that's not to say that we have to live in forest huts as we might imagine that we might hear, but there's a balance, I think, that's in play. And it's really become my life's mission to understand how we can actually apply technology to better be aligned with that balance, to actually build better ecosystems for both people and nature to reside in. And when you look at the role that green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, blue and green infrastructure, there's many urban forestry, there's many different names that we give it, but I just call it in general urban ecology. The role that urban ecology plays in that process of building sustainable cities is, of course, huge. Urban ecology offers us all kinds of different benefits, both socially, like having opportunities for social cohesion, having opportunities for people to come together in parks, boosting both their physical and mental health. I think this time of the corona crisis, when people were locked, in and near their homes, we've never had more of a really kind of direct notice to us to show how important those spaces are. There's nothing like if you're not allowed to leave your city, or if you're not allowed to go a certain amount of kilometers from your city, how attuned you become to the green space, or perhaps the lack of green space that you have close to your home. So I think that's kind of gained more attention than ever. But also ecological benefits. Of course, if these cities, if we want them to be future-proof and climate-proof and resilient to both the acute and chronic stresses of climate change now and in the future, we need these cities to be areas where they can absorb additional stormwater and rainwater. We're seeing this very starkly right now in the difference that the Netherlands has faced in these floods that we've seen the last week or so versus the damages that Germany and Belgium has faced. Of course, there are certain geographical considerations to consider in the damage that Germany, for example, has faced versus the Netherlands. But a lot of people are pointing to the 20-year projects called Room for the River and the River Maas works, where essentially the Dutch Ministry of Environment has spent decades trying to give more room for the river so that the river can do, the floodplains can do what floodplains are meant to do, which is provide room for all this excess water. And that's really what they're pointing to now to show that the damage was not way worse, and the fact that luckily nobody in the Netherlands has died from the flooding, and unfortunately in Germany, obviously, that has been very different. And this idea that if we give room to nature, nature doesn't need us. Nature understands how to deal with all of these acute and chronic stresses, but we have to give nature the room to be able to do those things. And of course, the economic benefits. There's plenty of of studies that have shown that, you know, people are more likely to stay longer on tree-lined streets, meaning that they're destinations, meaning that people will actually spend more money there. They give rise to different tourist and recreational facilities. Property prices increase in green areas, land values increase. There's so much that green and blue space offer us in cities. And when you look at all of these different benefits that urban ecology offers us, it's kind of the same thing that we look at when we look at Metabolic's 7 pillars of the circular economy. Metabolic has put together these 7 pillars of the circular economy to really focus on this idea that it's not just about the circular economy is not just about materials being cycled at continuous high value, but actually all these other factors as well, being based on where our energy comes from, how our water is used, that biodiversity and society and culture are being preserved, that human health and well-being of humans and other species is supported, and that human activities generate value in measures beyond just financial. Now imagine the overlap between the 7 pillars of the circular economy and all of these different things that urban ecology offers us. If you ask me, these two things are very interrelated, and that urban ecology is a key component of the circular economy that doesn't just fit into any one of these 7 pillars. It in fact means it has an important role to play in all of these different 7 pillars. So when I was working at Metabolic, I got the opportunity to look at many different municipal visions and agendas in order to be able to build metabolism scans, much like this one that we did for Rotterdam. So I'd be looking at the sustainable city agendas, the green city agendas, and of course, more and more, as we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years, the smart city agenda of a city. And of course, when we look at the smart city, if you type in smart city in Google and into Google Images, this is the most common image that you're going to get. Smart city components. I believe this image was drawn up about 5 years ago or about 4 years ago, so it's still relatively recent in terms of how we think about the smart city. Maybe that's a good question to ask is, can anybody see what's missing from this picture? Maybe you can just drop it in the chat if you have any idea of something that you see that is in this photo and perhaps is missing. You know, we're seeing things like manufacturing and government, anything else that might be missing from this image here.
We have nature already in the chat.
That was very fast.
Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed, nature is missing. As I mentioned just 3 slides ago, the very foundation of what we have to build our cities on is missing in this digital revolution and this broader kind of digital transformation of our cities. And that led me to this important question, which ended up leading me to pursue a PhD, which is, you know, how do we bridge this gap between green cities and smart cities? If we want to undergo this digital transformation of how we vote, how we deal with our waste, how we get around the city, how we eat in the city, all of these components, if we look at this image, if this image is to be believed, at least they're being considered under this broader vision of the smart city. Yet the very natural capital on which cities rely is being structurally undermined by this smart city revolution. And I don't think it has to be that way. In the very first couple of months of my PhD, I, together with some colleagues from the University of British Columbia and Dalhousie University in Canada, who had very similar interests at the time, were interested in trying to discover all of the different ways that technologies were being used in the area of urban forestry, urban ecosystem management, nature-based solutions, green infrastructure management and design and planning. We wanted to understand all of the different technologies that were being used. We found about 150 plus case studies of technologies that were being used in this way in cities, which was huge. Some of them, of course, were actually being used, some of them still very much in the pilot phase, some of them still very much ideas. But we weren't the only ones that were thinking about using technology in this way. And it was fantastic to see just how many designers, innovators, urban green space planners, urban planners, ecologists were actually thinking about using technology in this way. And what we found before getting into some of these technologies is that they more or less fell into 2 different categories. On the one hand, technologies were being used to actually better monitor and manage green spaces. So how can we actually better exploit the ecosystem services, the free benefits that nature gives to us in cities? On the other hand, we were actually seeing, quite paradoxically, that technology could actually be used to reconnect citizens with the nature at their very doorstep. And more or less, we've seen that these technologies kind of fit broadly into these two categories. Some of them actually straddle both and are actually able to be a monitoring and management tool, but at the same time have a role to play in reconnecting citizens as well, which I will show you now. So the Internet of Nature, what this whole presentation and what really my life's mission has become about is this idea that if we've seen all these different technologies play a role, I really felt like it was time to give that movement, give that framework, give that concept a name. And we called it the Internet of Nature for two reasons. On the one hand, it's a little bit of a wink, a little bit of a play on words, tongue in cheek to this idea of the Internet of Things, which of course is undoubtedly one of the biggest technologies that has taken over the smart city sphere. That's not to say that the Internet of Nature is only about sensors and real-time monitoring, but it's a little bit of an idea, a little bit of tongue in cheek to that technology side. The other side of it, very much rooted from nature, which is this idea that for any of you that might have come across the book of The Hidden Life of Trees, if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's written by a German forester in very easy to understand layman's terms about this idea that we used to believe that trees were actually these individualist, and plants in general were these different individual beings. And in fact, what we've discovered over the last 100 of years of science or so, and it's been especially popularized in the last 30 years, that trees are not individuals. In fact, they make up this superorganism of forest, and they're actually social beings. And underneath the ground, in an almost biological communication type network, trees and plants are actually exchanging carbon and nutrients and even information distress signals to one another via their underground mycorrhizal fungal fibers. And many of scientists and popular scientists have called this concept the Wood Wide Web, or Earth's Internet, which is essentially this idea that there exists this biological communication network under our feet in this way that plants and trees are able to connect with each other. As Reinhard said in his introduction, everything in nature is connected. So why don't we take nature online or help bring nature online in the same way? So the Internet of Nature really focuses on the application of emerging technologies for both the better monitoring and management of urban ecosystems, but at the same time, actually the reconnection of people to those ecosystems, but actually communication is a two-way street, reconnecting nature back to people as well. And for the rest of the presentation, I want to take you through some of the most exciting examples that I've seen of that and that I've had the pleasure of working on over the last couple of years. So the first one I want to take you through is we're going to start the Internet of Nature with, of course, the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is can be made up of, if the Internet of Things is a concept in itself, the things are sensors. And sensors are the nodes that we have in the field to be able to give us the information that we need to actually better understand our surroundings. And one of the main key issues that we're facing in urban ecology and in urban forestry, that on average, for every 100 trees that we plant, street trees that we plant in cities, only about 70 of those will make it in its first year, meaning that we're losing newly planted trees at a rate of about 30% every single year. This is not only a massive waste of resources. If we put on our circular economy glasses for a moment, think about the amount of resources that are wasted when that happens. This tree, the tree that we plant in cities is not a new sapling. In fact, sometimes these trees are already 6 to 8 years old. So think about all of the resources that went into growing that tree in the nursery beforehand. Then we plant it in a space. It structurally does not get enough water. And then from there, that tends to be the primary reason why trees don't make it. Now, of course, as Reinhard said in the beginning, we can't just throw technology on everything and expect it to save us. The most important thing when it comes to planting new trees in cities is that we give them the room and that we give them proper soil quality, and that we actually focus on building soil conditions rather than building tree conditions, because the soil, of course, is the foundation for which everything starts. But even when the soil conditions are really good, even when they get room to grow, trees are facing a high mortality rate in city. And the most structural reason for that to happen is due to a structural lack of water. And this is becoming increasingly more difficult in times of extreme heat in the summer times, but also extreme heat in the winter times, of course, which is confusing trees really in terms of their growing trajectories. So what these Soil Mania sensors allow us to do is actually allow us to see exactly when the moisture in the soil is low, so that we kind of develop this two-way communication, as you can see here with these speech bubbles, with the tree. And in an era where, you know, we are choosing to plant trees in cities because of the benefits they offer us, I believe it's our responsibility as human beings to provide them with the conditions so that they can actually grow and live their best lives. And this might be a way of facilitating that communication. So essentially how it works, that soil moisture sensor is planted when a tree is installed as well. You're able to see these notifications on a dashboard, or the tree care manager actually gets a notification straight to his phone or his email address, in which when he has to water these trees. But now that we've been working with these sensors for the past 4 years, we actually have a whole multitude of different data. So we're actually able to learn from that data as well, in which we're actually able to see, you know, in what weather patterns did we give so much water, and when and where did it happen? That can actually, what we're working on now is a prediction model behind the scenes that can actually show us not when a tree needs water now, but in fact, when a tree will require water and how much. It might say to us, this tree will require 150 liters of water in 48 hours. Once we've been able to master that, you're really moving from a very reactive sector to a much more proactive sector. And it works too. To give you an example, this is a project in the south of the Netherlands in Maastricht, on top of the A2 tunnel, which is a brand new tunnel that they built. They decided to plant 1,000 linden trees, which are the trees that you see here. And they basically planted them in this metal box, this 2-meter metal box that they filled with soil, and then they planted these trees. So as you can imagine, it could not be more different than, you know, the normal rooting conditions of a tree, considering that they're standing in what is literally a massive metal box. So it was very important that the trees here made it, because it was a massive financial investment. And it's not just about the financial investment, it's about what you communicate to your citizens as well. If you put in all these new trees and all these people are enjoying them, and the next summer, more than 30% of these trees are dead, that doesn't build for a lot of trust with your citizen engagement as well, a piece to this, which I think is an important part that we tend to forget. So we did an experiment. We worked with a tree care manager. In one of the sites, he put no sensors and would give water in the way that he normally would. This is this man, Bert van der Linde. He has been working in this field for 40, 50 plus years. As he says here, he's developed a sixth sense for when it comes to watering trees. So that's how he's gone about it for the past 40, 50 years. In the other site, on top of this A2 tunnel, we installed only three soil moisture sensors for these 1,000 trees. And the reason why we were able to get away with just 3 sensors is because the trees were the same, the soil conditions were the same. We only really had to consider certain drainage issues, which it helped kind of inform where we should place these sensors, which is important to note, to really mention, because many people think when I start talking about sensors, they think, okay, you want to sensor up every single tree. That's definitely not what we want to do here. We want to use these sensors that we can better understand the conditions, so that we can learn, so that we maybe don't need the sensors in next season, so that we can move them somewhere else where we might need more help as well. It's all about facilitating learning. That's really how we should be using technology. So point being of the story, in the extreme summers of 2018 and 2019, Beert actually lost, sadly, 15 to 20% of all his new plantings and all of these other sites. But in this site with 1,000 linden trees, he didn't lose a single tree. And I think that it's important to show that this was a very small financial investment that had a massive impact. And I think the most important thing that not just Barrett said, but that we've learned from other urban foresters and tree care managers that have been using this technology is that they always felt that they were overwatering the trees, and the sensors showed them that they were actually underwatering the trees. So again, it's all about facilitating learning. Understanding something like that is obviously going to impact how you might go about watering your trees next time. And it's not just about tree care managers. In a small city called Gijsteren, in the south of the Netherlands as well, we actually installed soil sensors, but instead of these notifications going to the tree care managers, they actually go to the citizens that live around those trees so that they can actually take action. The dashboard, they can see it online themselves, but it's also on a screen in a cafe. They can actually see in real time the effect that they've had in terms of watering trees, which kind of brings a whole new data-driven, evidence-based approach to adopt-a-tree programs that we see in cities around the world. So moving on from Internet of Nature, Internet of Things, soil sensors, to something else that I think is quite exciting, which is the use of plant identification apps. So plant identification apps, for any of you that might have one on your phone, it could be PlantSnap, but there's also iNaturalist, PlantNet, Plant Identifier. There's very many on the market right now. They used to be, a plant identification app used to work in a way where you would take a photo of a plant, you would upload it to the community platform, and there'd be this community of international botanists that then might actually identify what plant or tree or mushroom or animal even you had in front of you. That's, of course, thanks to machine learning, has changed rapidly. We're now able, at least PlantSnap is the most technologically sophisticated plant identification app on the market. They can now, with about 90% accuracy, identify over 600,000 different species of plants, flowers, trees, and mushrooms. And there's other apps like iNaturalist that are able to do the same, but for many more insect and other fauna species. And so this is cool, right? You have an app that works really great in the field. Kids can use it. There's been nature education programs designed around it for both young and old to be better able to understand the biodiversity in their very city. But I think what's much more exciting is the massive database that's being built on the back end of this. And this is an incredibly valuable database, and PlantSnap could have chosen to sell this, but instead what they've pledged to do in 2022, when they feel like they've been able to get as close as they can to mapping every single plant species in the world, they're actually going to make that database open source, which kind of opens up this whole kind of new potential in terms of you have a full database of geolocated plant photos. You can start answering huge global questions of when were these plants blooming? Have this plant gone extinct in this area? What has happened to this plant? Cities can use these databases to understand where biodiversity is in cities and how it might have changed over time. So the applications of something like this really are endless. And it's a good example of how a technology can both straddle the lines between a monitoring and management tool and also a tool that can actually help reconnect people to nature. And I know what you're thinking, why would I want to use my phone to reconnect myself to nature or my children to nature? But think of it again as a facilitating role. The first time that you walk past a new tree that you're curious about, you might use this app to better understand what it is and how to better take care of it. The next time you go about doing that, you might be with new people and you might tell them that without ever having to use the app. It's all about facilitating those first interactions, learning, and then hopefully being able to raise the awareness from there. Another example I think that's important when it comes to the monitoring and management of trees is the use of LiDAR technologies. So LiDAR is the same technology that self-driving cars use to ensure that they don't run anyone over. They're using a constant LiDAR stream to basically create this real-time 3D map of everything that's in their surroundings so that they can quickly make decisions in terms of what they should do, whether they turn or swerve or stop. The same kind of technology can actually be used to create a 3D point cloud of all of its surroundings. And then Tree Tracker, a company based out of the Netherlands, has actually developed an algorithm that can filter out all this additional infrastructure so that you're just left with the trees. When you're just left with the trees, you can actually assess all of these different tree attributes. So someone might actually be doing this in the field, a tree inspector might be doing this in the field, except as you can imagine, it can take years before you've mapped even only the street trees in a large city. Sometimes in a city like Boston, for example, where we've explored this technology of using technology for tree inventories, they say it takes about 7 years to really be able to assess all of the street trees in an area by an expert in the entire city. Now you can imagine 7 years is a very long time. And although trees grow very slowly, a lot can happen with trees in 7 years in cities. So by the time that you've had that data, that very first data point that you've taken is more than likely outdated already. This offers us a way to be able to have much more up-to-date information so that we can actually use this information to create better monitoring and management decisions. But it's not just that, it's also, we have many models out there. One of them, the most popular one, is called iTree, which is actually able to take information about the tree, put it into iTree, which is a peer-reviewed software, which basically takes attributes of that tree and then actually creates monetary values or puts a monetary value on the ecosystem services of that tree. Now, for any of you that have done anything with data science in the past, you know that your output is only as good as your input. And the fact of the matter is that the input for a lot of these of tree data in cities sucks. So to be able to use this technology to create better tree input can actually help us better communicate all of the different things all of the important services that trees offer us in cities. And then the second to last example that I want to show you here is this question of biodiversity. I think we don't quite fully understand or have fully grasped just what a monoculture or urban forests are across the world. This was our attempt together with the MIT Sensible City Lab to better understand what the street tree species diversity looks like across cities across the world. So we did this for 8 different cities, but it's a completely open workflow. So it's available, it's completely open source and available for you to use with your own street tree inventory as well in your own city to be able to calculate the street tree diversity. And the reason why we did this is you can actually see for Amsterdam here, Amsterdam was actually the only city that, at least for the outside of the city, was able to meet certain street tree benchmarks. But for the inside of the city, as you can see, 47% of the street trees in the center of Amsterdam is actually made up of one species, the Dutch elm. And the Dutch elm, like many other elm species, is very susceptible to something called the Dutch elm disease, which, even though there are vaccination programs, yes, you can vaccinate a tree, it's still an annual struggle for Amsterdam to be able to protect its elm species. And especially when they make up nearly 50% of your street tree stock in a city, it becomes really important to look at, how could we actually increase the diversity of our street trees? But taking this kind of data-driven approach is the first step to getting there. And the last example that I want to tell you about, for the interest of time, okay, 2 more actually, is this is an example where you can actually use virtual reality to better communicate the benefits of ecosystem services. So instead of having to come up with new nature-based biophilic green plans that, to be honest, investors and developers are still having a really hard time seeing the value in those plans, especially when they're 2D on a piece of paper. It's very difficult to communicate what that ecosystem could look like. There's a company in London, but AECOM is a large engineering firm all over the world. But there's specifically an ecologist, Ash Welch, who's really been leading the way on using virtual reality to actually communicate what these ecosystems could look like so that they can actually bring in investors and developers to convince them. But the cool thing with virtual reality is, especially in an age of COVID where travel's been restricted, you can actually plug into the same virtual reality environment from across the world, and you can actually walk through that environment together, and you can change things in the ecosystem in the design process as well. So I don't think we even have fully grasped the possible applications with VR in this space, but it's definitely an exciting one to look for. And then my last example, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit room for questions if there are any, is this idea that we can actually, what they've done in the city of Melbourne, this started as wanting to give each tree an individual email address so that people could more easily report issues with that tree. The city of Melbourne thought about this because they had one, as many cities do, one central hotline email address where everybody could send in their concerns about cities. You know, it might be, this tree looks sick. You know, can you please come cut down certain branches of this tree? When are you removing this tree? When are you planting this tree? Many different questions that citizens had, except they were all channeled to the same thing. So the first question that they always had is, okay, well, where is the tree? Can you describe it to me? And that always led to a lot of miscommunication and complications and a lot of stress. So they thought, attach each tree's asset number to an email address so that each tree has its own separate email address, and then we can deal with this on a tree by tree basis. But what ended up happening instead is that each tree had an email address, and people didn't use them to report issues, but in fact started using them to share their love stories, their appreciation, their love for these individual trees. People sent love letters and poetry and song lyrics, and there was even a former homeless man that wrote to the tree that he wanted to thank the tree for providing him shade on really hot days so that he could sleep under the tree, but also the courage to turn his life around. I mean, really, truly remarkable stories that they shared. And I think, again, this is a beautiful example of how the Internet of Nature and the applications within it don't necessarily need to fall into a category of monitoring and management or reconnecting citizens or stakeholder engagement. They can really kind of beautifully bridge the gap between the two. So if you're interested in any of the stories that I've shared with you today, and there's plenty other ones that I didn't get a chance to, I'd encourage you to check out my new podcast, the Internet of Nature podcast, in which I interview different innovators and also urban foresters and ecologists that are using these technologies, about their technologies, how they came to the idea, and kind of what's next in this space. So season 1 is out now, and season 2 will be following up in September, which has a whole other host of interesting guests, which will be a pleasure to talk to. And I think that what I want to leave it on for now is that I know this can seem perhaps overwhelming. There's a lot of different technologies that we can assess, that we can use for all of this. But I think the most important thing when it comes to getting started with digitizing your green space, the most important thing that we need to decide is that we first need to measure. So we first need to understand where everything is. And there's a whole host of different technological tools to be able to do that. And what's important here is that we understand not just where the public greenery is, but also that on private land. In fact, 50 to 70% of our urban greenery is actually on private land, and that's pretty consistent around the world. So when it comes to monitoring urban ecosystems, from a municipal standpoint, we're actually typically only talking about 30 to 50% of the urban ecosystem. And of course, ecosystems don't work along, municipal boundaries. So we really need to understand that it's a broader picture, and technology can help us actually put that full picture into perspective. And from there, we can actually use technologies to better manage these urban ecosystems, make sure that we're not just planting trees, but that we're actually establishing trees, that these trees can grow faster, that this nature can grow faster, so that we can get more ecosystem services faster, and that we're using less resources along the way to get there. So on that note, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you learned something new, and feel free to connect with me on any of the platforms here. And if there's time, I'd love to answer any questions.
Yes, Nadine, thank you so much for the depth and these bright examples. There are already some questions, but I also encourage people to put them here in the Q&A right now, if you come up with some. And of course, most of the questions are about practical implementation of digitizing in our conditions. So one of the questions is, how can we mobilize the public to contribute and engage in digitizing the green in cities? And from my side, I have to add, and should we? So is the public the first and the key actor we have to mobilize in this process?
I think there's different ways to go about this. I think when it comes to mobilizing the public, I think that we can attach it either with mobilizing the public in the public sphere, which is I think that adopt-a-tree programs are crucial to keeping newly planted trees alive in areas. It's just that there's a huge gap between what citizens want to do and what citizens know how to do. So I definitely don't think that citizens should be pruning trees, that cities should be diagnosing trees. Let's leave that to the experts. But there's a large role to play in watering of trees because especially when it comes to the extreme hot summers that we've had and that we will continue to have, heat is actually not the enemy to trees. In fact, actually trees can grow faster in very hot temperatures as long as they have enough water. And that seems to be the key bottleneck. And it's very difficult for cities to be able to water all of the trees in one go. And that's where we're still seeing losses. So it's not only important for them to be able to have the real-time information to understand where to do that, but also have the real-time information so that citizens can take part, to really include citizens in that process as well. So whether that's having sensors set up and having a publicly facing dashboard where, you know, if citizens can actually see where to give water, then they can give water, and that will actually be noted in real time within 20 minutes what the effect was, so that a tree care manager can know, okay, I don't have to go there anymore. I think that's a really that holds a lot of exciting potential that we've already proved in Gijsteren. That's kind of really helped people take a whole new look at the greenery that's not necessarily theirs, but they do feel like they're taking ownership for it. And I think when you take ownership for it, you really start to be a better steward for it as well. So I think that's an exciting part. On the other side, on the private land sector of things, I think we can continue to put in a lot of public awareness campaigns about greening these private spaces, about really educating people and helping them understand that, yes, having only tiles there may look like it's low maintenance, but there's a lot of other ways to actually incorporate greenery in your private space that actually is quite low maintenance as well, and about all of the different benefits that can have. So I think there's partly an engagement perspective, but also very much still a raising awareness perspective about the benefits of green.
Yes, thank you so much. And while listening about this problem of lack of water for trees, I just recalled the scene a few days ago when I saw this huge truck that was watering roads in Kyiv. So these huge roads that do not have a shade because there are no trees along the road. So the truck is watering road, not to be that hot and not to get, this asphalt can be then
can buckle, yeah.
So they're watering roads, but no one is watering trees and or planting trees along the roads to create shade, so you don't need to water the roads.
Yeah, no, they have the same thing in Amsterdam, although they focus less on the roads and more on the bridges, because if it gets too hot, the metal of the bridges, I think this happened when you were in Amsterdam during that heat wave.
Yeah.
The bridges stopped working, which was huge in Amsterdam because it also meant that shipping routes, which of course go through the Amsterdam canals, were out of stop. So all these ships were stopped for at least a week. And the same thing. And now even here, when it gets above 25 degrees, you see the guys out with the hoses watering the bridges. And it's just, it's pretty insane in terms of where we give the priorities to, and that I think that's definitely something that I think education can help with a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we have time for some more questions. I'm checking. Hello, Nadine. I wonder how the tree sensors are powered, because between green and smart cities, we also need to address the use of green sustainable energy. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think, so there's a number of different things. So one, the tree sensors that we used are powered by normal lithium batteries, although the sensors that we've developed are completely modular. So there's still a lot of sensors out there that are essentially single use, that are disposable, which I don't think we should be using. I think there's a big, I think that this is a slightly different tangent, but there's a big conversation in the Internet of Things world where they say the more sensors, the better, and it should be about the quantity of data rather than the quality of data. I fundamentally disagree with that. I think you're much better off getting quality data with a higher price sensor that then also has the capacity to be built in a modular way so that we can actually reuse those sensors. So that's one. There is a really exciting company called Plant E. which is also based in the Netherlands near Wageningen University, which has actually discovered a way to power Internet of Things moisture sensors based off of the electricity that plants actually produce themselves, or being able to harness electricity from that. So that's, I mean, that's an incredible, still very expensive, but I mean, once that technology develops further, incredible solution, because that what that eventually means is that you're going to be able to have nature power these sensors that are going to be able to tell us when to take better care of nature, which I just think is an incredibly beautiful circular solution. So that's kind of two directions that we're going in. So one, I would really, when you're going to be using normal batteries, really always favor the ones that are modular, so that when your batteries, or you have rechargeable batteries as well, that you can swap those in and out. And I mean, look at companies like Planty that are doing truly remarkable things as well.
Great. Wow. As an alumnus of Wageningen University, I'm amazed again. So every week or every month, I'm getting amazed by all those companies that are around that food valley.
Yeah.
I'm just Googling it. Thank you very much. We'll check it for myself as well. Another question comes from, yeah, definitely a Ukrainian citizen, because we still can't understand how to find resources. Does city authorities have to start it, or private stakeholders or activists? Where does it come from normally?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ipa. And I don't know if I'm in the position to answer that for your particular city, but at least I can tell you from what I've seen is it doesn't always need to come from the municipality. So if we take the soil moisture sensor example, for instance, yes, it is in the municipality's interest to have those trees, not only be planted, but be established, but they're not often the party that are doing it. Oftentimes, the city will actually hire a contractor to plant the trees, and then they'll actually give that contractor a warranty and say, you have to keep these trees alive for at least 2 to 3 to sometimes even 4 years. That's pretty standard across the world when you have contractors plant trees. So then actually what we're moving into is, who in those first 2 years has the ownership of keeping those trees alive? It's actually the contractor and not the municipality. So that contractor it's in his or her financial interest to plan watering moments as efficiently and optimally as possible, so that they're actually saving money on resources and at the same time getting the highest effect that they can for the trees that they need to water. So that's what we've actually seen with the soil moisture sensors, is that oftentimes the green contractor actually becomes our client, and that after that 2, 3, 4-year warranty is up, what's cool to see is that the municipality actually then buys the sensors over from the tree care company, and then they continue to use them in their management of the trees as well. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to put it. The money does not always have to come from the municipality. It doesn't always have to come from the subsidy. Sometimes, luckily, and what I'm really working towards now is finding the Internet of Nature solutions that actually bring a lot of market value and actually have a strong business case as well.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Pablo is asking, is there any open source solution for soil quality sensors? I don't think so, but maybe you know.
There are a lot of open source soil sensors that have been developed. One of, I think, the most famous ones comes out of the University of Michigan. They're called OpenSci. So I would check those out if you're interested in that. My only disclaimer with open source soil quality sensors is the data quality.
Yeah.
Open source tends to follow, because of course it's open source, it has to be low cost. They tend to follow, creating tiny little disposable sensors that, can get you high quantity of data, but the quality isn't necessarily there. And in my opinion, you can have as much data as you want, but if you can't trust it, you're not going to be able to take any actions on it, and you're actually not really going to be able to change the status quo. So I would just be very wary of the data quality that these sensors have.
Okay, thank you. And maybe the final question. So if we want to start here in Kyiv, maybe with the community, maybe with the pilot project in one of the neighborhoods, or maybe even with the city administration or their city-owned company that is responsible for parks and green areas, How do we start from? How do we start with you? Or maybe you could advise to start first with this Treepedia open source project with MIT, and just map all the trees that we have along the roads, and then to see really our problem. Or yeah, maybe we should start with your consultancy and also sensors to really watch what is happening for a year or so. Are you open to this kind of cooperation in this region?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably when it comes to where to start, I think the very most important thing is to measure what we have first, and to make sure that we have data that we trust to understand where trees are and where greenery is not, because that's going to maybe prioritize where we want to intervene, right? So there's many ways of doing that. We could use something like Treepedia, indeed, which I wasn't able to mention in the presentation, but Treepedia was developed by MIT Sensible City Lab, where they essentially make use of opportunistic data like Google Street View imagery, and they're able to map using a computer vision algorithm what the quantity of canopy cover is at the street level across an entire street. This works well as an initial baseline, but Google Street View imagery does have its limitations. It's not always up to date, and Google Street View works in kind of a mosaic where if you're virtually walking down a street, Google Street View has been taking images for about 10 years now, and they'll take the best images that they have. So you could be in 2011, then you're in 2015, then you're in 2010, then you're in 2021. So it does vary a lot. And obviously, if you're looking at green space changes a lot. So that's a little bit one big limitation with street view imagery. The other thing, of course, is that it doesn't give the full picture, because you're only looking at street view and not at, of course, parks, which play a very important role in providing to the overall greenery. So that's where remote sensing solutions, I think, can play an interesting role, being able to use satellite imagery to understand where greenery is, getting an overall idea of your canopy cover, perhaps in combination with Tree Tracker, which I mentioned, which has the LiDAR, which is going to give you perhaps too much information even at this point in terms of where each tree is and how big it is. That is also based on the street, but they also have backpacks with the same scanners to go through parks as well. So you're able to create these 3D ideas of where your trees are. So I think that's step number one. And then from there, if you're going to provide an intervention and plant new trees in a certain area, then I think it's really exciting, not just for the tree care managers, but also for the citizens to engage them with soil sensors as well, because I think that's kind of one of the most data-driven ways that we have to actually include citizens and actually make them feel like they are having a difference.
Yes, yes. Perfect. I like the plan. So
all right, let's get started.
Wait for our emails, Nadine. Okay, thank you so much. We still had some questions that were sent in advance, but the time is up. So we thank everyone who has joined and who is still online watching. Thank you very much. This is kind of vacation time, and it's very important for us to see this interest from people all over the region. Nadine, thank you very much. Enjoy your day, and hope to cooperate in future on this.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.